the point I'm trying to make is that when you're asleep, this thing doesn't shut down. In fact, some areas of the brain are actually more active during the sleep state than during the wake state. The other thing that's really important about sleep is that it doesn't arise from a single structure within the brain, but is, to some extent, a network property. And if we flip the brain on its back, I love this little bit of spinal cord here, this bit here is the hypothalamus. And right under there is a whole raft of interesting structures, not least the biological clock. The biological clock tells us when it's good to be up, when it's good to be asleep. And what that structure does is interact with a whole raft of other areas within the hypothalamus, the lateral hypothalamus, the ventrolateral preoptic nuclei. All of those combine, and they send projections down to the brainstem here. The brainstem then projects forward and bathes the cortex, this wonderfully wrinkly bit over here, with neurotransmitters that keep us awake and essentially provide us with our consciousness. So sleep arises from a whole raft of different interactions within the brain, and essentially sleep is turned on and off as a result of a range of interactions in here. Okay.
The process of hearing involves sound waves creating mechanical motions that cause fluid in the ear to move in waves and trigger nerve impulses that the brain interprets as sound. The outer ear functions to funnel sound waves. The vibrations from these waves reach the middle ear and move the tympanic membrane, also called the eardrum. This causes three bones, called the auditory ossicles, to also move. The bones make contact with a fluid-filled structure in the inner ear called the cochlea. The mechanical movements of the auditory ossicles move fluid inside the cochlea. Fluid waves move hair cells that line the cochlea. The movement of these cells activates nervous system receptors. Signals are carried through the vestibulocochlear nerve, cranial nerve 8, to the temporal lobe of the brain, where they're interpreted as sound.
As sound waves enter the ear, they travel through the outer ear, through the external auditory canal, and strike the eardrum, causing it to vibrate. The central part of the eardrum is connected to a small bone of the middle ear, called the malleus, or hammer. As the malleus vibrates, it transmits the sound vibrations to the other two small bones, or ossicles, of the middle ear, the incus and stapes. As the stapes moves, it pushes a structure called the oval window in and out. This action is passed on to the cochlea, which is a fluid-filled snail-like structure that contains the receptor organ for hearing. Let's unwind the cochlea to get a closer look. In this enlarged cut view, you can see the spiral organ of Corti, which is the receptor organ for hearing. It consists of tiny hair cells that translate the fluid vibrations of sounds from its surrounding ducts into electrical impulses that are carried to the brain by sensory nerves. Let's take a look at this process in action. As the stapes rocks back and forth against the oval window, it transmits pressure waves of sound through the fluid of the cochlea, sending the organ of Corti in the cochlear duct into motion. The fibers near the cochlear apex resonate to lower frequency sound, while fibers near the oval window respond to higher frequency sound.
The coffee industry in Vietnam now provides a livelihood for millions of people, mostly around small farms like this of just a few acres. Across the country, farmers like Ho Bon produce a staggering 1.5 million tons of coffee. It's a key export for the country and our #1 source of coffee in Britain. Coffee is one of the most valuable traded goods on earth. Globally, the industry is worth more than £40 billion. It's the single most important tropical commodity traded worldwide, accounting for nearly half of total exports of tropical products.
The crucial year is 1986. That's when the Vietnamese Communist Party had a major meeting. They realised the economy was in a terrible state and they decided to relax the rules and, among other things, start growing and exporting coffee on a massive scale.
The state-planned collective farms were swept away. 500,000 smallholdings emerged in their place. And in the 1990s, coffee production grew at a staggering 30% per year.
Before we discuss political systems, however, it's helpful to address the confusion that has been spread about the political spectrum. Many have been led to believe that the political spectrum places groups such as communists on the far left, fascists or dictators on the far right, and political moderates or centrists in the middle. However, a more accurate political spectrum will show government having 0 power on the far right to having 100% power on the far left. At the extreme right, there is no government. The extreme left features total government under such labels as communism, socialism, Nazism, fascism, princes, potentates, dictators, kings, any form of total government. Those who claim that Nazis and fascists are right-wing never define their terms. This amounts to spreading confusion. Toward the middle of the political spectrum can be found the type of government limited to its proper role of protecting the rights of the people.
Thirdly, life from non-living matter. And this illustration often used is the one of the monkeys at the typewriter. Okay, so we have a monkey sitting at a typewriter, and the claim here is basically if you leave chance and time long enough, you will get life. Don't worry about it. Yes, it's strange. Yes, it's wonderful. But leave enough matter, 600 million years on Earth, and you will have life. So the monkey's sitting at the typewriter, and the chances are eventually he produces the complete works of Shakespeare, so what's the problem? So there's no problem. There isn't an issue, right? You just leave him long enough, you'll be fine. And at one keystroke a second, the monkey might well eventually get to the complete works of Shakespeare, but he doesn't manage to do it in 600 million years. So what I decided to do to run the numbers is instead of saying type the complete works of Shakespeare, I just ran the numbers for how long would it take a monkey typing at one keystroke a second to type to be or not to be, that is the question. Right? On average, how long is it going to take my monkey friend at one keystroke a second? I don't know how long you think that would be. Maybe you could have a guess. Would it be less or more than 600 million years, which is the period life on Earth is supposed to have emerged within? And when I ran the numbers, to be or not to be, that is the question, takes 12.6 trillion years to type just that phrase. And a DNA string, which you have to have for the life we have now, doesn't emerge is not like a sentence's worth of information. A DNA string has got as much information as the Encyclopedia Britannica. Right? So if we're saying that emerged, something of that complexity emerged by chance, undirected, within 600 million years, again, it's mathematically possible, but it's so incredibly unlikely that it would have, that it tilts me in favor of the Christian story in which God creating life is simply a question of saying, let there be, and there was.
Mary Mallon, better known as Typhoid Mary, was the first person in the United States identified as an asymptomatic carrier of the pathogen associated with typhoid fever. She was presumed to have infected 51 people, 3 of whom died over the course of her career as a cook. She was twice forcibly isolated by public health authorities and died after a total of nearly 3 decades in isolation. From 1900 to 1907, Mallon worked as a cook in the New York City area for 7 families. In 1900, she worked in Mamaroneck, New York, where, within 2 weeks of her employment, residents developed typhoid fever. In 1901, she moved to Manhattan, where members of the family for whom she worked developed fevers and diarrhea, and the laundress died. Mellon then went to work for a lawyer. She left after 7 of the 8 people in that household became ill. In 1906, she took a position in Oyster Bay, Long Island, and within 2 weeks, 10 of the 11 family members were hospitalized with typhoid. She changed jobs again, and similar occurrences happened in 3 more households. She worked as a cook for the family of a wealthy New York banker, Charles Henry Warren. When the Warrens rented a house in Oyster Bay for the summer of 1906, Mellon went along too. From August 27th to September 3rd, 6 of the 11 people in the family came down with typhoid fever. The disease at the time was unusual in Oyster Bay, according to 3 medical doctors who practiced there.
In 2018, scientists plan to create a second sun. Inside this tokamak reactor, 2 varieties of hydrogen will be mixed together. The gaseous mixture will be confined by strong magnetic fields and brought to a temperature 10 times hotter than the sun. At this temperature, the nuclei of the hydrogen atoms are able to fuse and liberate considerable amounts of energy. The reaction will send out an explosive burst of particles, similar to a solar flare. Although a lot of power will be required to kickstart the reactor, around 10 times as much energy could emerge. The project could provide us with an almost limitless supply of safe and green energy.